Imagine standing before the masterpiece Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, gazing up at the radiant ceiling of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo, reading the world-changing words of Copernicus about the universe. This is not just history, this is a revolution in thought. This is the Renaissance when art, science, and philosophy exploded, illuminating the old world after centuries of darkness, laying the foundation for European dominance across the globe for centuries to come. But why was this the case? If you could travel back in time, Europe at this point would be a terrible choice. You would witness the brutality of endless wars and suffer under the harsh rule of the Catholic Church. In 476, the fall of the mighty Roman Empire to Germanic tribes plunged Europe into a dark and chaotic era. The Middle Ages, the once unified Kingdom of Rome, was fragmented into many regions. The Visigoths took Spain, the Lombards dominated Italy, the Franks controlled Gaul, and the Angles and Saxons settled. In England, these tribes did not live peacefully, but often clashed violently. Adding to the turmoil, the Black Death swept through like a deadly blade, wiping out more than half of Europe's population and pushing society into further despair. Indeed, this darkness, the Catholic Church rose as a dominant force controlling political, economic, and spiritual life. This power suppressed intellectual development, with thinkers like Galileo and Copernicus labeled heretics and harshly punished. All signs of progress in Europe seemed frozen, yet in the shadows seeds of advancement quietly grew, ushering in a new era, the Renaissance, when the light of knowledge and art once again spread across Europe. This was centered in Rome, the very heart of the former empire, and where the Renaissance began in the 14th century, gradually spreading to become a comprehensive revolution. It was not just a revival of classical values from Greece and Rome, but also a turning point in how humans thought about themselves and the world. If the time machine took you to the dark, chaotic, and vengeful Middle Ages, then the Renaissance would be the salvation of your journey, an era where personal development, humanistic values, and intellect took center stage. Thinkers placed humanity at the center of the universe, celebrated freedom, creativity, and the ability to explore the world through reason and science. The return of enlightenment laid the foundation for many major innovations, from political philosophy to the arts. In the realm of philosophy and politics, names like Erasmus, Thomas More, and Niccolò Machiavelli left lasting marks with works such as The Prince, which offered a fresh perspective on power and leadership, challenging traditional views. But it did not stop at ideas. The Renaissance was also a time of great exploration that changed history. Christopher Columbus discovered America, Vasco da Gama opened the sea route to India, and Ferdinand Magellan completed the first voyage around the world. These journeys not only expanded geographical boundaries, but also gave Europe access to new civilizations, resources, and ideas. The Renaissance in science became a launchpad for revolutionary discoveries. Nicholas Copernicus, with his heliocentric theory, challenged the geocentric view that had existed for thousands of years and paved the way for the scientific revolution. Leonardo da Vinci was not only a painter, known for his immortal masterpieces, but also a genius inventor who left behind hundreds of mechanical sketches, many of which later inspired modern technologies. This era was also a time of flourishing art and literature, with classical works that enriched cultural life and shaped the ideology of the time. The Renaissance was not merely a revival of ancient values, but a springboard for extraordinary advancements in art, science, and modern philosophical thinking. The intellectual awakening propelled Europe into a new era of progress, both for the continent and for humanity as a whole. The Renaissance marked a turning point in how people viewed the world and their role in it. Whereas European society had previously been confined by strict religious and conservative thought, the Renaissance brought a fresh breeze that liberated imagination and sparked creative thinking. The great figures of this era, from artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo to eminent scientists and philosophers such as Galileo and Francis Bacon, all demonstrated dissatisfaction with known boundaries. That very spirit became the guiding flame for inventors of the following centuries like James Watt, who improved the steam engine, and Richard Arkwright, the father of the modern factory system. Moreover, the Renaissance brought fundamental changes in how humans understood the natural world. Scientists such as Copernicus, Galileo, and Johannes Kepler not only transformed human understanding of the universe, but also established new standards for scientific research. The scientific method they pioneered became a powerful tool later widely applied in engineering and technology. For example, the mechanical principles of Isaac Newton, a scientist deeply influenced by the Renaissance, became the foundation for the design and operation of complex machines, thereby driving the breakthrough development of machinery in the Industrial Revolution. Additionally, trade routes discovered through geographical explorations not only brought prosperity to Europe, but also created an ever-growing demand for mass production. This demand spurred technological innovation and changes in production organization, laying the groundwork for the birth of factories and modern manufacturing systems. Scientific and technological advances from that brilliant era opened a new age of European global expansion. The Renaissance fueled the flourishing of science and commerce in Europe, giving rise to a new wealthy class, the modern bourgeoisie. Their rapid growth brought an increasing demand for resources that the small landmass of Europe could not sufficiently supply. This forced the great powers to seek gold, silver, spices, and slaves from new lands. That marked the beginning of the colonial era, led by Europe across the globe. Groundbreaking advancements in maritime technology, such as the compass, detailed maps, and versatile ships, enabled Europeans to cross oceans and explore distant continents. Famous explorers like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan not only discovered new lands and ushered in an era of global trade, but also laid the foundations for colonial invasions by Europeans in the centuries to follow. The exploitation and control of resources from colonies prolonged the wealth of the old continent, but in return, indigenous peoples in the Americas, Africa, and Asia suffered brutal exploitation and the loss of sovereignty and traditional cultures. Meanwhile, in Europe, the capitalist class increasingly asserted its dominance, transforming the social structure from feudalism to a capitalist model. They became the driving force in shaping a new society based on an industrial market economy and constant innovation, though this also led to severe consequences for Europeans. Few could have believed that a glorious era like the Renaissance, which marked the rebirth of literature, science, and art across Europe, would also sow the seeds of division within the continent. The idea of the nation-state began to take root in the 15th century, when countries gradually freed themselves from the tight control of the Catholic Church and reduced the role of the clergy in secular state structures. At this time, nations were built on distinct identities, laying the foundation for the formation of modern ethnicities. For example, in Germany, according to scholar Philip Justin, in 1813, King Frederick William III of Prussia emphasized national spirit in his governance to ensure loyalty and inspire the fighting spirit in newly annexed territories. Such policies permeated the lives of families and communities, helping shape the German national identity. However, despite their strong pride in a rich cultural and historical heritage, the Germans found themselves overshadowed by powers like Britain and France, especially amid the explosion of great geographical discoveries. These two nations, with vast colonial networks, quickly became leading empires, while the Germans had to find a way to assert themselves on the international political and economic map. From here, colonial tensions among powers escalated and eventually erupted into World War I. But it did not stop there. Nationalism grew increasingly extreme, especially the emphasis on German identity, once again becoming a catalyst for World War II. This time, the war not only caused heavy consequences, but also brought immense suffering and loss, far greater than the previous war. However, extraordinary advances in military science during the two world wars laid the groundwork for future technological revolutions. Important inventions in physics, chemistry, and mechanics paved the way for the development of modern weapons, from handheld guns and cannons to advanced military technologies that made wars even bloodier. The Renaissance was seen as the origin of Europe's powerful rise, but no glorious era can last forever. The law of prosperity followed by decline is an inevitable truth in the flow of human history, and Europe is no exception. A modern Europe. Western civilization dominated the world for centuries, but it is now beginning to reveal its weaknesses and signs of decline. After being devastated by 2 world wars, Europe ceded its supremacy to the United States, which emerged as the dominant power in the 20th century. For many decades, European values were seen as global standards, but they are now facing numerous challenges from different regions. China, with its grand ambitions, is reaffirming its position on the international stage. Its historically rich culture is rising strongly again. Alongside Russia, China is promoting the BRICS bloc with the aim of reshaping the world order. They believe the current values, heavily influenced by the US and Europe, are unfair. Even smaller nations are striving to establish their own principles and values. ASEAN, representing small and medium countries, is working to set its own standards, to both avoid being caught in the fierce competition between the US and China and assert its position internationally. For instance, countries wishing to engage with ASEAN mechanisms must accept the values and principles set by the organization. This helps ASEAN maintain its independence and show leadership in the region, while creating a stable and balanced environment for cooperation among major powers. Most of these countries, except Russia, were once under European colonial rule. However, over time they have risen strongly and continued to develop economically and socially. In contrast, Europe, once the center of global power, is now showing signs of crisis, from economic stagnation to political and social instability. The lack of consensus within the European Union has created major barriers to maintaining unity and strength in facing growing challenges. The public debt crisis in the early 2010s shook the EU's financial foundation, particularly in southern countries like Greece and Italy. Although the EU is trying to recover, its pace is much slower than that of the US and China. The European economy also struggles against waves of cheap Chinese goods that put immense pressure on its manufacturing industries. In addition, issues such as population aging and a shortage of young labor are intensifying socio-economic tensions. In the past, Europe was seen as a promised land for immigrants from all over the world, but now it faces numerous problems related to racial discrimination and terrorism. Waves of immigrants from the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia have diversified Europe's population, but also caused cultural and social tensions. Xenophobia and the rise of anti-immigration movements have divided European society and weakened the unity that was once a strength of the region. More worryingly, the specter of war has returned to the continent. Since 2022, the conflict in Ukraine has had profound impacts, especially on countries in the region. Although these countries are trying to prevent the conflict from spreading, the situation remains highly unpredictable. All these factors are pushing Europe into a deep political crisis, most clearly shown by the collapse of many governments in leading countries. The biggest question for Europe now is whether it can adapt and redefine its role in the modern world. History has shown that no empire stays at the top forever, and decline does not necessarily mean the end. Europe remains a cultural and intellectual hub of global importance. If it can overcome its current crises, it can still maintain its position, even if it may no longer be the sole dominant force.